Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. If you have yet to become a subscriber, please hit that subscribe button below to support the channel. With every like, subscription, and comment, these platforms become more likely to recommend the videos and or podcast if you are listening to this via podcast to others. And it would be extremely helpful for the channel's growth the more you guys interact, so thank you in advance. I have another unsolved case to talk about today. We are on case 21, and even though it's technically considered an unsolved case, we know who committed these murders. A family was annihilated, and yet the person who was responsible has never faced justice, and at this point, probably never will. I will now go ahead and put up my disclaimer. This is a really heavy case. 5 lives were taken in a very brutal way. Most of them were children. The manner of which these people were killed is absolutely horrendous. You all know by now that I talk about very dark shit on this channel, but I know when I talk about cases involving child victims, it just hits differently for obvious reasons. So if you don't want to hear about this type of a case right now, I completely understand, and hopefully I'll catch you guys in a future case, or I'll also leave a link in the description for one of my playlists on my channel so you can pick out another case I've covered. But enough chit chat, let's get into today's case, the Crawford family murders. For this case, not only will we be traveling back in time to the 1970s, but we will also be heading to the complete other side of the world in Australia. For the people who have been with the channel for a while, most cases I've covered have taken place in the United States, but we are branching off today, and if I butcher any Australian cities or street names, I do apologize in advance. Feel free to correct me in the comments. I do try my best, but you know, the internet sometimes isn't as reliable as we would like it to be. But with any case, it's best to start at the very beginning. The story starts with a woman named Therese McManus, who will later become Therese Crawford. Therese was born on March 16, 1935 in Sydney, Australia. She spent her entire life in Australia and was always described as a very happy and bubbly girl. She was very social and outgoing and made friends very easily. She was that friend who would drag you out at night to a bar or a club with her. She was frequently referred to as the life of the party, and she loved to go out dancing. As she grew older, she became very nurturing. She cared a lot about people, and with this trait, she decided to become a nurse and relocated to Melbourne, Australia. During one night out with friends, her life would change forever when she met her future husband, Elmer Crawford, who will be referred to as EC for the remainder of this video. EC was born in May of 1930 in Canada. He actually grew up in Ireland with his grandparents, as most of his family was from Ireland. He later dropped out of high school and decided to immigrate to Melbourne, Australia at the age of 22, where he would eventually meet Therese. The moment they met each other, they instantly clicked. They had been hit with Cupid's love arrow and they became inseparable. This was a whirlwind of a relationship, and within months of Therese and EC becoming a couple, Therese became pregnant with their first child. Therese had grown up Catholic and had a strong faith, and she did not want to have a baby out of wedlock, so Therese and EC immediately got married before their first daughter, Catherine Jane Crawford, was born in 1957. Catherine was a bright and friendly young girl. She excelled academically and had dreams of becoming a nurse in order to help people, just like her mother. She loved learning, and she was also a very talented piano player. As Catherine grew up, Therese continued her job as a nurse, and EC began working as an unlicensed electrician for the Victoria Racing Club, a job he would continue for the next almost 13 years. And for those of you who are not already familiar with this case, remember this man was an electrician. This will be important later. Right before Catherine was born, EC purchased the family's home at 136 Cardinal Road in the North Melbourne suburb Glenroy, Victoria, Australia. In 1962, their son James William Crawford was born. James was described as friendly and outgoing, just like his mother Therese. He was adventurous and loved playing outside with friends in the neighborhood. Then in 1964, their second daughter, Karen Jean Crawford, was born. Karen was a sweet little angel. She was always happy. She loved animals, and she also loved spending time with her family. From the outside, everyone thought that the Crawfords were a normal, happy, and loving family. Neighbors described them as friendly, but also kept mostly to themselves. No one really ever noticed any drama or signs of abuse from within the family. They didn't have money issues, as EC was not only good with money, but he was also very stingy with it. He didn't like to spend money if he could help it. He owned not only the family home, but also purchased a couple of other plots of land. For the 1960s, they were making good money. Both EC and Therese had good paying jobs, but of course, not everything was sunshine and rainbows. After the birth of Karen, Therese sadly began to suffer mentally. There was not an official name for it back then, but Therese suffered from postpartum depression after giving birth to her third child. As we know today, postpartum depression is not a joke. So many women suffer from this. It's a real issue that I think needs to be talked about and normalized more. Many women feel ashamed for having those feelings after having their baby. Society acts like this should be the most blissful and happiest time of your life, but in reality, it's not always the case. In fact, I would argue that most of the time, it's not the happiest time of your life. Now, I can't speak a lot on this because I have not been pregnant, but I hear so many stories from other women's experiences and so many true crime cases you read about postpartum depression and psychosis. It's just a terrifying and tragic illness. Therese Crawford suffered and struggled from this depression for the rest of her life. Overall, EC seemed annoyed by his wife's decreasing mental state. At first, he helped out as much as he could. He tried being patient with Therese, and at one point, he even invited Therese's parents to stay with them for a few months to help out with the house and the kids. Therese was also prescribed depression medication around this time, but she never seemed to have gotten any better, and after a while, EC lost his patience with her. Then towards the beginning of the summer of 1970, Therese discovered that she was pregnant again with their fourth child. Police would later discover a letter that Therese wrote to her sister, claiming how she was not happy at all about this pregnancy, and she also alluded that EC wanted her to get an abortion. And even though she herself wasn't happy about her pregnancy, she was even more angry with the fact that her husband wanted her to get an abortion, which she was strictly against due to her religious beliefs. In this letter, she also states that she was about 2.5 months pregnant at the time. She wrote that the baby would be due in the end of January of 1971. About 2 weeks before the murders, EC and Therese had prepared new wills that stated that if anything were to have happened to Therese, then EC would inherit a decent fortune, including at least $3,000 in cash. Now, if this isn't a red flag, then I don't know what is. I wonder how the conversation was even brought up. Did EC just casually go up to Therese and was like, "Hey Therese, I think we should work on our wills just in case something happens, and let's make sure that we put in there that if anything were to happen to you specifically, then I'm gonna get some money." I know I'm not on camera, but I'm rolling my eyes right now just so you guys know. I wonder if Therese was at all suspicious of her husband, or if she noticed any signs of what was about to happen to her and her children. That brings us to the night of the murders on July 1st and early morning hours of July 2nd, 1970. What I'm about to describe is the widely presumed theory of events that investigators have pieced together throughout the years of how EC murdered his wife and children. EC had been planning the murder of his family for several weeks, if not months at this point. On the night of July 1st, after the 3 children fell asleep, EC used a lead pipe-like object to bludgeon Therese into unconsciousness. EC then laid the now unconscious Therese on the bed in their bedroom. Then the sick man used this homemade electrical device that he himself made in order to electrocute his family. This device was a 15-meter-long electrical cord with a plug on one end and an extension cord socket on the other end. On the end of the extension cord socket were 5 smaller leads that had 5 alligator clips on the end. EC clipped the alligator clips onto Therese's ears and her hands, and when he flicked the light switch on, Therese was electrocuted with 240 volts of electricity, killing her and the unborn baby inside of her instantly. After killing Therese, he went into his daughter's bedroom. Catherine and Karen shared a room together. It is believed that he killed the oldest Catherine first. He did this by hitting her head over and over again with a hammer. Then he did the same thing to Karen, also hitting her head over and over again with the hammer. This piece of shit didn't stop there. After brutally killing his daughters, he then used the electrical device he created on Catherine and electrocuted her in the same way he electrocuted Therese. He clipped on the alligator clips to her ears and hands and proceeded to electrocute his eldest daughter. Most believe Catherine was already dead before this electrocution, but for some reason, he did not electrocute Karen. Some people think it's because Karen happened to be his favorite child, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me personally. I'm more with the people who believe that EC was going to electrocute Karen, but he was interrupted. This interruption was his son James. After killing his wife and daughters, it is widely believed that James woke up from all of the noise and he walked in on his father electrocuting Catherine. Without hesitation, EC grabbed the hammer and murdered his only son by again bashing his head with the hammer. Then he dragged James's body onto his bed and electrocuted James in the same exact way as Therese and Catherine. Therese was 35 years old and approximately 3 months pregnant with her fourth child. Catherine was 12, James was 8, and Karen was just 6 years old on the night of the murders. A family annihilated in one of the most gruesome and horrific ways I have honestly ever heard. The method EC chose to murder his family is deeply disturbing. I'm not a psychologist by any means, but to murder your wife and kids by electrocuting them with a device that he made himself and also bashing his children's heads with a hammer to the point where all of them had fractured skulls is just insane. And it seems very personal, as if he wanted to inflict as much pain as possible on them. I just don't understand. These were the people he was supposed to love and protect. He had been with Therese for almost 14 years. They created an entire life together, brought in 3 beautiful children into the world, and a 4th was on the way. It just sucks because not only were 5 lives taken, but most likely at this point we will never truly know why EC did this. After killing Therese and their children, EC wasted no time in trying to cover up what he had done. He took the family's 1956 Holden sedan and literally removed the entire back seat of the car. Then he wrapped each family member's body with the sheets and blankets from their beds that they had all just been murdered on. He stacked all of their bodies in the back of the sedan. He placed trash bags and a tarpaulin on top of them to conceal the bodies in case he were to have gotten pulled over on the long drive he was about to make. He stocked up on snacks and had gallons of gasoline with him so he didn't have to stop at all during this trip. He also brought a rifle, a hose, and the hammer he had used to kill his children. EC then drove from the family's home to Loch Ard Gorge in Port Campbell, Australia, which is about 150 miles or 241 kilometers in distance. This drive took almost 3 hours each way. The Loch Ard Gorge is an absolutely stunning place. If you have a chance and are listening to this via podcast, take a moment to look up photos because it's gorgeous. It's a place where many people go to visit. The Loch Ard Gorge is surrounded by giant cliffs where people are able to go and look down meters below to crystal clear blue waters. EC had been at this location multiple times, and investigators believe that he had always planned to dispose his family's bodies at this location from the moment he had planned their murders. After driving almost 3 hours in the middle of the night, it's still dark outside, and EC drives the Holden sedan as close as he can to the edge of one of the cliffs. He knew he had to do this as quickly as possible. He wanted to get back to his home so he could clean up as much evidence as he could. Another fact about the Loch Ard Gorge is that it was known as a place where people have previously taken their own lives. It has a history of people jumping off the cliffs, so in an attempt to prevent this, there were large rocks placed at the edge of the cliffs. So EC had trouble getting the car to the edge. He had to get out of the car and move these large rocks himself in order to make a pathway big enough to squeeze the car through. When investigators later find the car, they find traces of EC's blood on the ceiling in the inside of the car. It is believed that EC had injured himself while moving the rocks out of the way, and this is how his blood got in the vehicle. I know I'm stating the obvious here, but let's keep in mind that there are 4 dead bodies, his family's dead bodies, in this car the entire time. Could you even imagine driving 4 hours with these bodies? It's ridiculous. Now, EC has the car on the very edge of the cliff, and he stages everything to look like a murder-suicide. He drags Therese's body and places it on the front seat, and he takes the hose that he also brought with him and connects the hose to the exhaust and feeds it through the driver's side window of the car. Then EC pushed the car off the cliff. I believe EC was hoping for a couple of possibilities to happen when the car fell to the bottom. He hoped either the car would explode down below with the bodies inside, destroying evidence that he had murdered them, or he hoped that the car would fall into the water and wash away the car along with the bodies, also destroying evidence of his involvement. A lot of people think that EC almost committed the perfect murder plot. And if either one of those scenarios he had hoped for had happened, then we may have never known the truth. EC wanted to pin everything on Therese. He wanted to create the narrative that Therese killed their children and then killed herself by driving the car off the cliff. EC wanted to be the grief-stricken husband and father who everyone felt sorry for, but thankfully, he made a mistake. The car did crash to the bottom of the cliff, but it did not explode, and it did not fall into the water. It landed 16 meters below the cliff, and amazingly, it had been caught on the rocks below. We don't know if EC noticed this since he presumably pushed the car on the cliff while it was still dark outside, but either way, EC left the scene, and he either rode back on his motorbike that he had also brought with him in the car, or he managed to hitchhike all the way home. We don't know 100% how EC had gotten back home. But as soon as he got home, he began deep cleaning the massive amounts of blood that was inside his house. He was frantically scrubbing the carpets with carpet cleaner in an attempt to get rid of the blood. At approximately 8:15 a.m., EC was interrupted by a knock at the door. At the door was Catherine's school friend named Brenda Connor, who would always walk to the Crawfords' home to pick up Catherine so they could walk to school together. Brenda would later retell this story, and she is believed to be the last person to have spoken to EC before he disappeared. She explains that she was caught off guard when EC had answered the door because he was usually at work by this time. She expected Catherine to answer the door as always. She told EC that she was there to get Catherine so they could walk to school together, and EC told her that Catherine had the flu and would not be going to school today. Brenda says that when he told her this, she remembered thinking that Catherine must be really sick if she was missing school because she loved school. But she took his word, thought nothing else of it, and continued her walk to school. Meanwhile, as hours had passed, it was now light outside, and the Holden sedan at the bottom of the cliff was in plain sight for anyone to see. At around 1:30 p.m. on July 2nd, 1970, a family had been sightseeing at the Lockard Gorge, and they quickly noticed something strange on a ledge at the bottom of a cliff. They realized it was a car and could see that the front of it was smashed as if the car had been involved in a head-on collision. It was hanging off the ledge just inches away from the water. They couldn't tell if anyone had been in the vehicle, but they were able to see the license plate, and with this information, they immediately alerted authorities. Police arrived at the scene, and just like the family of tourists who had found the car, they also were not able to see if any bodies were in the vehicle. Again, this place was unfortunately known to be an area where people would take their own lives, but they could see trash bags from within the car. For hours, they debated on what the best way was to be able to get to this car. The police quickly tracked down who the owner of this vehicle was by the license plate number. At 5:30 p.m., neighbors of EC witnessed him walking on his driveway going in and out of his home. At 6:20 p.m., an officer named John McCarty had been sent to the Crawford's family home to inquire about the sedan that was found at the bottom of the cliff. This officer knocked on the door, but there was no answer. I do want to make it clear that when this officer came to the house, they still had no idea that 4 bodies were inside the vehicle. They had no clue that they were dealing with a murder investigation yet. And astoundingly, EC was still in the house at this point when this officer knocked on the door, but EC did not dare to answer. With no answer, the officer just left the premises, and knowing that he was now out of time and was not going to be able to carry out his original plan by blaming Therese, EC fled and never looked back. Cliff rescuers were called to the Lockard Gorge, and a couple of rescuers were lowered down onto the ledge. Once they were lowered onto the ledge and could see the car more clearly, they immediately noticed how strange the situation really was. They noticed the hose from the car's exhaust pipe was pushed through the driver's side window. They quickly realized the entire back seat of the car was missing and could see a dark tarpaulin and a pile of blankets. When they got the back doors of the car opened, they were immediately overwhelmed with the smell of death, and they saw blood splatter everywhere in the vehicle. The cliff rescuers lifted the tarpaulin and could see 4 sets of feet. It was a horrific sight, seeing the Crawford family's bodies piled in the back of their own car. The rifle, hammer, and a box of family photos were also discovered in the car. It took several more hours to secure the car and lift it out of the cliff. They actually didn't achieve getting the vehicle out from the bottom of the cliff until the afternoon of July 3rd. Now they were just trying to piece together what had happened to this family. With the bodies discovered, investigators immediately went back to the Crawford home and broke inside the home at around 10 p.m. the night of July 2nd. The state of the home was horrific despite EC's cleaning efforts. There was blood everywhere, on the beds, on the floors, on the walls. It was a very gruesome crime scene. Half-clean bloodstains were throughout the house as well. They found fresh carpet cleaner on some of the stains, indicating that someone had recently tried to clean these stains, and they found the cleaner solution sitting on one of the tables. They also found the electrocution device that EC had made and used on almost all members of his family in one of the bedrooms, which at the time they were completely confused by this device. They had no idea what it was. They were able to see blood trails from the bedrooms to the kitchen where EC had dragged each person and then wrapped their bodies with the blankets and sheets. It was horrendous. They also found bloody stained pajamas laying on the floor and a half-eaten bowl of cereal on the table. They knew someone had recently been in the home, but also realized that this person dropped everything and fled the scene at a moment's notice. Investigators also realized without a doubt that this case was no longer a murder-suicide. It was a cold-blooded murder, and it dawned on them that the number one prime suspect is nowhere to be found. For the first couple of days after the bodies were discovered, they thought maybe EC had also been in the car with the family when it went over the cliff. But once EC's neighbors had reported seeing EC in the driveway in the late afternoon of July 2nd, after the tourists found the car at the bottom of the cliff, that was quickly ruled out. Of course, at the very beginning of an investigation, investigators did not want to jump to conclusions, especially with it being such a strange crime scene, so they reenacted how the car was pushed off the cliff. They brought in the same model vehicle, loaded it up with dummies, and pushed it off the cliff, and it landed within inches of where the Crawfords' vehicle landed. With them recreating the scene, they ruled out a lot of different scenarios of what could have happened. They were able to rule out that no one had pressed the gas pedal and drove it off the cliff. They confirmed that the car had to have been pushed off of the edge. They also ruled out any possibility that EC had also been in the car when it went over as well, because his body would have been in the car. There was no way that his body could have flown out of the car on impact. Pieces were starting to come together to what had happened to this family. An autopsy was done on the Crawford family, and this is how investigators discovered how gruesome the Crawford family's deaths had really been. There were electrical burn marks on the ears and hands of Therese, Catherine, and James. These marks were the same shape as the alligator clips that were found. There was one blow to the back of Therese's head. All three children had been hit in the head with the hammer several times, fracturing all three skulls. Of course, after identifying the bodies, they knew the only family member missing was EC. For the next several months, on top of searching for EC, they also did quite a bit of digging on this disgusting man. Through interviews with people that knew the family, they all described EC in a very similar way. They described EC as a quiet, reserved man who never really wanted to talk to anyone and kept to himself as often as possible. Some people reported that even though EC was generally quiet, he had a nasty temper when he was angry. He had been known to explode without any warning. Something else investigators discovered was that EC had been stealing from his job and reselling these stolen items in order to make more money. Then, of course, police found the new wills EC and Therese had created just a couple of weeks before he had murdered the family, and they found the letter that Therese had written to her sister regarding her anger towards her husband for wanting her to get an abortion. With all of these factors and evidence, investigators had pieced together what had happened to Therese, Catherine, James, Karen, and the unborn baby that was growing inside of Therese. In 1971, a warrant for the arrest of EC was officially filed for the murder of his family. But as of today, EC has never been located, let alone arrested. Why did EC murder his entire family? That is a question we will more than likely never have the answer to. When EC fled his home on the day of July 2nd, 1970, he completely vanished. No one had any idea where this man went. He was just gone. Decades went by, and even though investigators were able to piece together what had happened, the individual responsible for the murder of 5 people was nowhere to be found. The case went cold. Then 24 years later, in 1994, A woman who had reportedly had been an acquaintance of EC called investigators to report that she believed that she had seen EC at a hotel in Western Australia. She was so convinced that he had been EC that she actually went up to this man at the hotel. She described that he looked a little different. He had either dyed his hair or he may have been wearing some sort of toupee, and she confronted him and asked him who he was. This man told her he was just a tourist from New Zealand and that he was not this wanted man that she thought he was. Police believed that this source was credible, but again, they were unable to find this man that could have possibly been EC. It's rumored that this woman did not immediately report the sighting to the police, and that after this man, who she wholeheartedly believed to be EC, left, her and her husband decided not to alert the police right then and there because it would ruin their holiday at this hotel. If this is true, and I've seen this reported in a few sources, not just one. Like, you have got to be kidding me. A woman and her children were brutally murdered, and you can't pick up the phone to alert the police that you saw this wanted man because, God forbid, it would ruin your vacation? That's absolutely ridiculous. After this alleged sighting, the case once again went dead silent for several more years, until the year 2005, when a man was found dead in Texas and was found to have multiple IDs on him, as well as his fingerprints had also been self-mutilated in order to presumably prevent identification. Allegedly, this man looked remarkably like EC's age progression photo that had been released. With these similarities, they decided to use facial recognition technology on this dead body, and this technology identified this man as a possible match to EC. Once this news got back to Australia about this man, it was the first time everyone became so hopeful that they had finally found him. It took 5 years, but in 2010, they had managed to locate a known blood relative of EC, and they performed a DNA test on this deceased man's body, but this DNA test confirmed that this man was not EC. And with this revelation, investigators were once again back to square one. From the time I am recording this in January of 2024, if EC is even still alive, he would be 93 years old today. Investigators who continue to work on this case have not, and claim that they will never give up hope to find EC and to officially solve this case. 93 years old. If even still alive, this man has gotten away with killing his entire family for over 50 years. Therese, Catherine, James, Karen, and the unborn Crawford baby have not gotten any justice. This man slaughtered his family, and as far as we know, has not gotten any type of repercussion for his crime. The case reminds me of the Watts family murders that happened in 2018. Chris Watts murdered his pregnant wife and children, but thankfully in that case, he was arrested for his heinous crime. There are so many unanswered questions for the Crawford family's case. Even if they found EC today, which of course I still hope and pray that they do, but let's say he's miraculously found alive. How much justice could really be given at this point? It better be a quick-ass trial. The man is in his 90s. He lived a full life as a free man. The entire thing just irritates me to think about. If anyone out there has any information or believes they have seen EC, please contact Crime Stoppers Australian number at 1-800-333-000. I hope continuing to share this case brings awareness and maybe even more tips to where on earth EC could be. But that is everything I have on this case. If you liked the video or enjoyed listening to the episode on podcast, please hit the like button below, comment down your thoughts, and share on all social media platforms. And I will be back with yet another case soon. But until then, bye guys.